All right, let's get started. This is our regular Saturday evening Language of the Heart meeting of the Stairway Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Jim, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Jim.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. We're going to have some fun tonight. We're going to take a look at a very interesting part of the Language of the Heart, an article by Bill which traces the history of the 12 steps, how they came about. In the meantime, let's start with a moment of silent meditation, and we'll say the Serenity Prayer together. Thank you. Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. And Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship, men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, and may solve their common problem and help others recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is the desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for a membership. We are self-supporting to our own contributions. And AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, nor wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober, help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. And the purpose of an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting is the teaching and practice of the 12 steps. And that's what this Language of the Heart book concentrates on, is the 12 steps. With your permission, we will waive the reading of chapter 5 tonight. Anybody got any objection to that? We're getting a little bit of a late start here. Is it okay? All right. Page 195 in Language of the Heart. A fragment of history, origin of the 12 steps. AAs are always asking, where did the 12 steps come from? In the last analysis, perhaps nobody knows. Yet some of the events which led to their formulation are as clear to me as though they took place yesterday. As far as people were concerned, the main channels of inspiration for our steps were 3 in number. The Oxford groups, Dr. William D. Silkworth of Towns Hospital, and the famed psychologist William James, called by some the father of modern psychology. The story of how these streams of influence were brought together and how they led to the writing of our 12 steps is exciting and in spots downright incredible. If you have your big book, you turn to page 292, please. You'll see one version of the 6 steps of the Oxford group on page 292. Now let's see, I'm not sure, is that, you guys, most of you have the 4th edition, don't you? Mm-hmm. The story is he sold himself short.
In the chapter Fear of Fear?
No, he sold himself short is the, look in the table of contents. 258. Wow. Well, it'll be about 3 or 4 pages. Let's see, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Be on approximately the 6th page, so approximately 260. You see those 6 steps of the Oxford group there? Everybody got that?
263.
What is it, 250? 250, 63? No, 263. 263, okay, thanks. So the 6 steps, as reported here, were 1, complete deflation, which of course roughly corresponds to the first step, doesn't it? 2, dependence and guidance from a higher power. Now that would be the 2nd step, and at least the second step and the 11th step. 3, moral inventory, the 4th step. 5, confession, the 5th step. 4, confession, the 5th step. 5, restitution, the 9th step. And 6, continue to work with other alcoholics, was comparable to 12th step. Now there's another version which we will find on page 200 in Language of the Heart. On page 200, 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. Step 1. 2, we got honest with ourselves, which is really the 4th step. 3, we got honest with another person in confidence, the 5th step. 4, we made amends for harms done others, the 9th step. 5, we worked with other alcoholics without demand for prestige or money, the 12th step. We prayed to God to help us do these things as best we could, which is roughly the 11th step. Now, the reason that we find that there's so much diversity here, and I wanted to show you that, is that the Oxford group steps were an oral tradition. They were not written down. These steps had never been written down, and the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, as they eventuated, had never been written down. But you can see by looking on page 200 that there were a lot of gaps in there, considering the steps as we know them now. For example, where is the 2nd step? Where is the 3rd step? Where is the 6th step? Where is the 7th step? 8 and 9 are in there. Certainly 10 is not. 11 seems to be, and 12 obviously is there. So you can see that there were major gaps. Now, the most important gap in the Oxford steps was the 10th step, what we now know as the 10th step. And the reason for that is that the Oxfordians believed that once having worked their 6 steps, one would become perfect. It was a degree of perfection which was attained as a result of working the steps. And therefore they saw no reason to go forward with these steps any further except to carry the message, which in a sense was apostleship, discipleship. They did not preach from street corners. They followed they thought that they were following the first century Christian doctrines. Our guys found out that they could not continue to live in the world without constantly having the recurrence of defects of character and guilt and remorse and shame, the same things that were put to rest by working the steps, and that they had to have some way to deal with these daily as they occurred. Therefore, the 10th step was an outgrowth of the experience and the trial and error of the early members, in which what they found was that if they took the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th steps and put them all in one step to use, that they could continue to inventory their defects as they came up. They could continue to admit their defects as they found them. They could continue to ask God to remove them. And they could continue to make amends quickly if they harmed anyone. And then they had found out that they must constantly turn their thoughts to someone they can help. And so they added that into the 10th step. And then as a postscript, that love and tolerance of others is our code. Now all of this again was oral tradition. It all came about as a result of experience of those first people in those first 3 years. But that 10th step is a step of inspired genius because it allows us to live a relatively comfortable and serene life and to continue to grow spiritually. They also, in concert with that 10th step, through trial and error, added an inventory in the 11th step. And that inventory is principally directed toward making sure that the 10th step was worked during the day. And wherever there's a gap there, to pick it up and to deal with it at night before we go to bed. That's a little bit of background. Let's go to page 201 and we'll see from Bill what happened in the writing of these steps. Page 201, first full paragraph. Having arrived at chapter 5, it seemed high time to state what our program really was. I remember running over in my mind the word-of-mouth phrases then in current use. Notice again, these have never been written down. Jotting these down, they added up to the 6 named above. In other words, that was the Oxford group stuff, which they had been trying to follow. Then came the idea that our program ought to be more accurately and clearly stated. Distant readers would have to have a precise set of principles. This is what we were talking about earlier tonight. A precise set of principles. That means the steps had to be precisely stated. Knowing the alcoholic's ability to rationalize, something airtight would have to be written. This militates certainly against the idea that somehow or another we can treat these steps cavalierly as some sort of presumptuous suggestions. They're not that at all. They were designed to be airtight. We couldn't let the reader wiggle out anywhere. And the big book is consistent all the way through about that. There's no wiggle room in it. Everything is categorical imperatives. Besides, a more complete statement would help in the chapters to come, where we would need to show exactly how the recovery program ought to be worked. Notice the word exactly. How the recovery program ought to be worked. Here's what happened. At length I began to write on a cheap yellow tablet. I split the word-of-mouth program up into smaller pieces, meanwhile enlarging its scope considerably. Uninspired as I felt, I was surprised that in a short time, perhaps half an hour, I had set down certain principles which, on being counted, turned out to be 12 in number. The steps are the principles are the steps. And for some unaccountable reason, I had moved the idea of God into the 2nd step, right up front. Besides, I had named God very liberally throughout the other steps. In one of the steps, I'd even suggested the newcomer get down on his knees. By the way, the 7th step, as it was originally written, read, humbly on our knees, ask Him to remove our shortcomings.
Why was that removed?
Huh?
Why was that removed?
I don't know. It was a quirk of the editorial board. They didn't like the on our knees, so they took it out. Now this is the way the 12 steps came about. Those 200 words which are changing the world. I think it's really important for us to understand just how inspired Bill had to have been. Since they were originally published in hardcover, they have never changed. Never, not one word. And yet millions have recovered using these steps. Millions more are now in recovery. Not only in AA, but in all other human problems. One way or another, they're using the 12 steps now. Why? Because they bloody work. Because they work. If they did not work, we wouldn't be here. If there was something phony baloney about this, if there was some slop in it, something about these steps that required that we have facilitators or psychiatrists or psychologists or doctors or lawyers or somebody to interpret them and to goad us into working them and this kind of thing. But none of that's true. These steps, precisely as they've been stated in the Big Book, work for every human being. And this doesn't make any difference whether we're an alcoholic or not. These steps are for every person on earth, because they are spiritual principles restated as steps of action. Well, that's how the steps came about to be written, and I think it would be a good idea, if it's all right with you guys, if we kind of shared our thoughts about this, starting right now. And who'd like to get started? Anybody got any ideas or questions about it, like to share with us?
Yeah. My name's Larry.
Hey, Larry.
First time I heard this, that it was like over a 24 period that he was inspired to write this stuff down.
Yes.
And that encouraged me to think of all those 200 pages that we talked about on the 12 steps.
Mm-hmm.
It gave me confidence enough that I followed them, if I delved into them, I would get better.
Sure.
And this is only recently that I felt that way. And I'm just so glad that I come here for someone to help me go through these things.
Mm-hmm.
I just bumped into a fellow that where I worked when I first went to the program. I didn't have a very good response. The best he ever did was fix me up with his sister-in-law. That was his 12-step work. I had, it was just, and from there it got worse. I had a struggle for this program. And I didn't have a good sponsor that directed me to the steps in my second year. But I chose to travel to New Orleans in my fourth year, which I should never have done. And there were reasons for that in my head. So, coming back to all this struggle, just to go to meetings. So anyway, I come back here, and I'm retired now. I don't have to work anymore. I don't have to struggle with it. And so I've been able to start going to meetings. I've been going to meetings regularly anyway. And but this is the first time that I've really been able to get into this program for a long time. He inspired me tonight. Surely it built character in me. And that's the only thing I got out of all this wanting to stay sober and struggling all by myself. Not in a weak program, but I made it so what I'm saying is I was inspired by this bill. It's almost like I, as a Catholic, would say the Holy Spirit, giving them this information, this inspiration from a higher power, God. And this is the way I take it. I take it almost like a Bible. And to me, it's more, and it's a long. It was inspired just for me because I'm an alcoholic. So, what I get out of this is everything. I hope to learn more and more about, well, I've had some very bad, I've tried to help other people stay sober, and I just didn't have it. I just didn't have it good. And some of them stayed sober in spite of me. And but I have one now that I'm really concerned about, and this has helped me to pass this message along. Anyway, I'm glad I come here because today, especially tonight, listen to this guy give me encouraged that, you know, if nothing else, it's built character working down there. He understands what I've gone through, and I guess I get more out of him tonight than I even got out of this, but that's how I feel tonight.
Good. Thanks, Larry. Turn to page 207, just the next page over.
Yeah, I'm Buddy, I'm an alcoholic. I fell asleep during the meeting and we just chatted and I thought I was just a total dud tonight, but I appreciate Larry saying that.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is that you're very fortunate to have the time to do it, you know. To be able to cultivate all that. Because we were talking, and I said, you know, when you're in certain parts of certain areas of the country and this and that, where he was talking about, I know he wasn't from Louisiana, and where he was, it was all refinery workers and all hard people, and they don't care about anything but eating and drinking. And he said fighting, and I said, oh yeah, they do that, and it's hard. It's a real hard area, and I said, you know, I'm here, I'm by myself, I'm the same way, and that and this. I've been here for 2 years, I hate every day of it. But the truth of the matter is, in the process that you go through, especially if you're a loner or whatever, or a runner, I'm a runner, you know, you go through these things, and if you just stay in there and talk to God, thank Him every morning, I try to sometimes, it does build character. And after a while, I don't know how to explain it, you know, as we were talking, I mean, it builds character for me to be here. I don't like it. For me, that's home. For you, that wasn't. For me, it is. So that's a hard area, but in that area, but yet it builds character to be anywhere that you're not home, you know, that you call home. And the only way I could stay here was through God, asking Him every day. I had a guy at work and I hated him. And I didn't know how to get rid of him because he was my boss. So I started praying for him. Praying that he has long life, prosperity, and for him and his children, and his wife, and peace, the peace of God. And he got a better job and he left. And this black guy in the program told me, he said, you see what you did? You prayed him away. And I said, I'll be damned. I sure didn't. I didn't even know it. I didn't even know it. I'll be damned. I didn't even realize it, you know. God works in a real, He's very mysterious. My mother used to say that all the time. He works in a very mysterious way.
Did you find when you said those prayers that your resentment was lifted?
I tried. That's a good question. Because the hardest thing in the world, you know, is to mean it in your heart. Because when you see the person, if you mean it in your heart and ask God to give me the willingness to really mean it, to be willing, to be really sincere about it, then He didn't torment me as much. I think there's people sense the Spirit. You know, the Spirit senses the other spirit. I believe that the Spirit, you know, and I don't know how to explain it. But, he didn't bother me as much and this and that, and I don't know, it's a funny thing. Life is funny. a strange thing. This is definitely a delve into the spiritual world. You say that all the time. The book says it. And I believe that totally. I believe it. And if you're a runner, I was a runner all the time. I went way 4,000 miles away to do my fifth step. Because I didn't trust anybody. I said, no, I'm not going to let anybody know my deepest, dark secrets. A lot of people go to a priest, and that's a cop-out. Go somewhere you don't know anybody. Tell them everything. And then leave. 6 months or something. That's what I did.
Well, there's an easier way, you know.
Yeah.
Because most places you can find the local hospice.
Right.
You find somebody's going to be dead by the night.
Yeah, there you go. My mother was sitting on hospice. She had emphasis. You're right. I forgot about hospice. What a cop out. But hospice, it'll work.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a great program now.
Well, Larry was mentioning that he's come to believe that these steps are inspired. On 202, Larry, a little right at the top of the page, this little fragment of history ought to convince the most skeptical that nobody invented Alcoholics Anonymous. It just grew by the grace of God. Well, Bill believed that too. He knew where that came from. He knew where those steps came from.
Yeah.
He knew he was inspired in those 30 minutes. And at the time that this happened, he had no concept of what was going to transpire. He hoped that thousands would be helped. He didn't know it would be millions upon millions. He didn't know it was going to be worldwide. He didn't know 155 or 56 countries would have AA. That this book he was writing would be translated into 30 foreign languages and continue to be translated more and more. He didn't know that. He hoped that it's going to have a significant impact. And the only reason that all of that is true is because, in fact, he was inspired, and because, in fact, these 12 steps do work. That's it. And the proof is in the pudding. There just simply is no argument about that. And the people of New Age AAers who argue about it feel sorry for them. They simply haven't got it yet. Who's next?
I'm Howard, and I'm an addict. And you know what's very interesting when you take a look at the steps in a bigger light is that it seems to me it's really the underpinnings of a very professional program, and it has the same mechanics of any of the professions. For instance, in the beginning, how it works, call to action, and then teach it. And it's just like any of what would have been the crafts years ago, or the legal or the medical profession now. And how does it work? Well, it works because you trust in your mentors, you trust in the professionals, you trust in the certified craftsmen, the professors, and then you put your nose in the book and you learn, and you do a residency for 10 years or whatever, and then you go out, and how do you get really good is when residents come to you and you start teaching them, and the whole thing becomes a way of life. And that's why it's not just for AA, it's for all the professions and in anything that anybody wants to get good at. And as I see it, one of the difficulties I'm having right now is it really is a connection, a mind-body connection, a spirit-body connection, where I have a tendency to intellectualize things and not feel them as a great escape. And to be able to bring the two of those together, to be able to have faith and a spiritual awakening for me has been difficult. But as an aside, I have to tell everybody, I wasn't supposed to be here today. I was going to go up to New Jersey because my dad passed away on Father's Day 6 years ago. And then my mom passed away last year. So I was going to go up and say some prayers and go to the cemetery and all that, and that was going to be tomorrow. But my dad, bless his heart, had always been to me a great teacher, and he'd always say, and he had graduated high school at night, and he had to work many jobs. And he was proud of that, but he never had the opportunity to go to college. But towards the end of his life, he had said all about, I never had a formal education, but he'd go and say, well, you can't, even with a formal education, earn respect that way. It's got to be earned day by day by day. And I watched my dad go ahead and he'd bring food in bags and things at Christmas time to people. And Steve, who used to work in our house, was an alcoholic, and he wanted them to have a good, and he was a giving person, and I learned that from him. And I just can't help but think that with me being unable to go up this weekend for my father's, what's called the yurt site, the anniversary of his death, he would be only smiling and very happy that I happen to have found this group and happen to have found you over in Boca and then followed you around, because I believe so strongly in the message that you're displaying. It's truly like, if you will, a teacher teaching teachers, and that's the way that the fellowship tends to go, because for us to be good, to take it into people into the future, it's got to be a great feeling for you. And I can tell you from having been in school many years, it's a great feeling to find somebody who is such a dedicated teacher, and that's what makes it work for me. That's a feeling that you just can't buy, and it's just an emotional feeling, a spiritual feeling. And I'm sure that in heaven right now he's looking down smiling, because he'd say, you just have to keep looking hard to find good teachers, and that's what it's all about in my book, is you're always looking to find a good mentor in anything that you want to learn how to do. So I'm very happy that the group is here. I'm very glad that I was fortunate enough to have kept listening around, because I knew that there were some good teachers around. I just hadn't found them yet. Now I have, and thank you.
Good, thank you, huh? Good, who's next, huh? And Brian.
Yes, my name is Brian, and I'm a grateful member of the band.
Hey, Brian.
And I love the history of AA, and I love learning the history of AA. And I enjoyed what I learned tonight. But the one thing I learned that wasn't in the print that you read was when you told us what the original 7% was. And right then, as soon as you said it, it just went right to the heart. That when I pray to God, and I got my elbow on the table and I got my fingers on my eyes and I'm closing my eyes and I'm praying to God, there's still a little ego there. But when I bow down the head and I humble myself and I get on my knees, that's prayer, to me. And it was so funny. It just makes, when I hear the truth, it makes complete sense. I have no questions. You hear the truth. If you don't hear the truth, then you have questions. Well, what about this and what about that? But when you hear the truth, it makes complete sense. That I feel satisfied. And it was funny that you brought that out tonight, because from now on, I made a lot of promises in my life. Mom, I'll finish school, Mom, I'll do this. But I pray and I hope that from now on that I give God respect and I get down on his knees and just be so grateful and thankful of everything that he has given me.
Well,
I appreciate that.
this was a compromise with the liberals. They did not want any trappings of religion, and so they objected to the on your knees stuff. They didn't really like the humbling, but they had to be propitiated, otherwise there would never have been a consensus to get the big book published. One of the compromises they made with them was in the second printing of the first edition, they would be allowed to include what is now called Appendix 2, which is a rather scurrilous little piece, which is based upon a false premise and reaches an absolutely wrong conclusion. And nevertheless, they permitted this to be footnoted in the second printing of the first edition, and then put it to the back as an appendix. Now, the people, the liberals, wanted to amend the big book to include this in the body of it, and that never worked. But we do have to suffer with that appendix 2. The most shocking thing in there is when it recites that our more religious members call it God consciousness. And of course, the big book on page 85 tells us that we will all become God if we follow directions that has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with religion. It's based on a false premise that people are going to be confused, thinking that they have to have an epiphany, a bright light experience in order to recover, and yet the big book is quite specific in three different parts, point out three different times when it tells us this is not so. And Bill's story that most men come to God slowly, for me, it was sudden. But, you know, so there's no doubt about it. Anybody who reads the book would not be confused about that. But that was their excuse for putting that in, and their basic idea was they wanted to castigate those in the who were they considered to be super religious. And so they made sure that they got that snide comment in there that our more religious members call it God consciousness. We of the enlightened minority do not, and this kind of stuff. So there's all kinds of screwy stuff that was going on in those days, and how in the heck this all came together as well as it did was a total mystery. I had to be that God wanted it that way, or it never would have happened.
I have two questions. One, the first question is there a print of where the seven step originally was? Is there a print of that where Bill W?
Sure. Yes,
Sure,
as a matter of fact, a dear friend of mine named Marilyn brought me a copy of the original manuscript. I have it.
Okay. I'd like to see that.
He doesn't believe me. He's got to see it in writing.
Does that want to make copies? See, I'll be right back.
Is your name Thomas? I thought it was Ryan.
And secondly is, I wouldn't like to get political, but have you ever gone to the delegates in New York and told them about your views? The appendix?
Yeah, I was an AA politician for quite a while, and I bailed out of that. That wasn't working very well, but I was up there. It's a useless. It's like the nipples on a boar hog. How's that useless? It's a wonderful debating society. Has absolutely no power whatsoever to do anything except make recommendations and send the ESRs, send the delegates back to their districts to try to get people to go along with it. But that never works. But it's a lot of fun, and it's, you know, you get to be way up the ladder. It's the highest office you can attain in AA, is to be delegate to New York. So when you're in your district or you're in your area, you get invited everywhere to speak, and everybody who's just, you know, oh, Master, tell me what to do. But AA politics have no interest in me anymore. I tried that. I was a circus speaker for 5 years, and I got out of that too. That's just a major ego trip. That's all. If you've been to a lot of conventions of circus speakers, you realize all the stories pretty much sound alike. That's because they borrow from each other all the time. Whatever it is, it will get you invited back. It's got to be shocking, it's got to be funny, and it's got to be profound. The weirdest one that I ever heard was this. There's a story that you hear all the time. My sponsor was a street god. In fact, he lived in a cardboard box down there on the street. I've heard that about 20 times. But gee, that's a whole bunch of sponsors. Either there's one sponsor in a cardboard box, or there's a bunch of people he sponsored, or there's a whole bunch of these guys up. But this one guy got really carried away, and he said, my sponsor made me call him every night as a whoops! Where was that phone in that cardboard box? Oh, boy.
Before the age of cell phones.
Yeah, well, that was way before cell phones, believe me.
Yeah.
So I asked the guy about afterwards. He said, "Oh, well, there was a payphone right around the corner from the block."
They probably said that.
Oh, sure. Okay, who else would like to share? Marilyn, you got anything you want to lay on us, kid?
I was just looking at how he was talking about how many superlatives he used here, like accurately, clearly stated, precise set of principles, knowing the alcoholic would rationalize something airtight, not even let the reader wiggle out anywhere beside a complete statement, where we would need to show exactly how they're covered. And I just
You think there's a message there somewhere?
yeah, and I just think it's amazing how they ever came up with anything, because everybody's got so many opinions, especially all coming from Park Avenue or Fox's.
Yeah, well, you see what happened was, Bill wrote this thing as a manuscript, and now they all had money up. And they were going to get their money back and make profit by publishing the hardcover and selling it. They formed a corporation. Was a commercial corporation. So they couldn't screw around with this too much. They wanted to get it into print, get it out there where they could make all this money. Otherwise, they'd have been arguing about it still.
Yeah, right? Where it says 10 strikes, does that mean like, it says ought became a 10 strike for Alcoholics Anonymous?
10 strike? Oh, that's like when you bowl.
Okay.
10 strike is all 10 pins at once.
So it means like all of a sudden they said, okay,
Yeah.
and that is when...
Well, it's a big success.
Okay. When we must make it easier for people like themselves by using a higher power or goddess understanding. I think that's great because
What? It's when they use a
higher power or goddess, we understand him instead of specific religiousness. I think that's great because we don't just sit around arguing about religion all the time.
Oh yeah, well, we wouldn't be here if that was... If that had ever taken hold, if we were dealing here with religion, this would never work. Never work. We'd have, this place has been long gone, 40, 50 years ago. We wouldn't be here.
So the agnostics were really a very important part of...
Oh yeah. But there was a lot of balance there, and they kept the conservatives from going all out and claiming that you had to have a God consistent with their God. So that's what they wanted to do. And the Christians wanted to make sure that this was a Christian offshoot, just like the Oxford people. See, that was a Christian sect. First century Christians, they were an offshoot of the Episcopal Church. So, but you notice that the only place we find sins mentioned is in the 12 and 12.
Right.
And Bill came out with that business of the 7 deadly sins. I think he intended it just to be by way of illustration, but of course everybody's picked up on it now as if those are the defects. We don't deal with sin at all. We don't make those kind of judgments. And sin is peculiarly a function of religion, not of AA. Likewise with the St. Francis prayer, that's just by way of illustration, but now it's been picked up as so-called 11-step prayer. It can't be. It's religious. It is a sectarian prayer. It's a prayer of a Catholic saint, and it speaks of an afterlife. We could never be a protocol. And yet, try to tell that to the people that decided that 12 and 12 is the only way to go. 12 and 12 dies very hard because it doesn't give you any directions. You can make up all your own directions how you want to work stuff. You could even say it doesn't matter how you work stuff so long as you work them how. There's no direction here for work. If you pick up the 12 and 12 and try to find out where it tells you anywhere how to work any of the steps, it doesn't. It's just a bunch of stuff written about this stuff. A lot of philosophy and stuff. Nowhere are there any directions except this. And without directions, how do you build your ship of the Spirit? You can't. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I've got a question for you. In understanding addictions, the different types of addictions, because addicts tend to substitute one for the other, whether it be alcoholism or drug addiction or overeating or promiscuity or gambling or all the different addictions that are out there, most people, if they really want to help themselves, do a 12-step program, and that's what it's all about. But when we speak about it being a craving and where it's like an allergy, and then you say that alcoholism is not the disease, it's really the treatment of whether the disease was trying to run from pain and discomfort and depression and all the other things that we run from when we medicate, whether it's alcohol or drugs or eating. I just get confused a bit as to, we're saying that alcohol is a fatal progressive disease, and then on the other hand we're saying it's not the disease, it's really the treatment for the disease.
No.
Help me.
No. I don't think I've ever heard it said that way. Alcoholism is unique. It is not the same as drug addiction. Although the treatment centers have popularized the idea that a drug is a drug is a drug. Well, that's a bunch of crap. Because from the standpoint of recovery, alcoholism is unique in that alcohol has the effect on the human body of an allergy which requires the body to have more and more alcohol. And you don't find that with any of these other so-called addictions. But there's alcohol. Well, maybe there are people who get so sensitized to a drug that if they take one drug, they have to continue to take more. But it's probably because their body demands it. Otherwise, they begin to go into a withdrawal. I don't know enough about the physiology of it, but I do know that alcoholism is limited to that class of people, or maybe 8 or 10% of the population. Every human being who indulges in drugs, overindulges in drugs, will become addicted to them, because they are addictive by their very nature. Alcohol is not. It is only addictive to those people who fall within the class of the alcoholic. However, in the final analysis, this becomes entirely academic, because the 12 steps are there for everybody, and the solution to anybody's problem lies within the steps, no matter what that problem may be. As far as people switching addictions, yes, that's certainly true. Most of the time in Alcoholics Anonymous, we find that people will get off the booze and become addicted to other people, become dependent upon other people, become addicted to food or to money or to sex. They'll substitute addictions. However, if they're working the 12 steps, those fade away, because the solution is exactly the same. See, that's the beauty of it. It doesn't matter what you come in here with, whatever your problem is. Or even if you don't have a problem. I just took a lady through the steps who has no problem from this damage. She's a little bit screwy, but she doesn't overindulge in anything. But the steps are kicked right in for her, and her life has changed, because these are spiritual principles which are not limited to alcoholics or drug addicts or anybody else. They apply to every human being. We don't have any monopoly on them. What we do have is the first book ever to describe these spiritual principles as steps of action. That's the genius of the 12 steps. And because we've had long experience in working with them and using them. But other than that, anybody who's willing to study them and to become proficient in their use can teach others to do it. I've taught ministers to use this in their churches. That's why I wrote 12 Steps for Christians, because they couldn't get anybody sober. These people were not addicts or alcoholics. They wouldn't dare be. They'd be fired from their job just like that. Unless, of course, they're Catholics. Excuse me for that. But they take, I wrote the 12 Steps for Christians. They take that guide and use it and put people through the 12 steps sitting there in their rectory office, and these people get sober. And they get clean, and their life changes. So, you see, when you're dealing with principles,
they're applicable across the board to everybody. By its very nature, a principle is not selective. It is a fact of life, it is a rule, it is a law, it's one of God's laws. This is the way I expect you to be. Now here are the steps that we have to show you how to be that way. And we never had that before. Now we have it. And it doesn't matter from whatever religion you came or no religion. Because the steps are steps of action. Take the action. You will find a power greater than yourself, and you will come to believe in that power, and you will come to trust that power if you work the steps. Because you take one leap of faith after another, and every once in a while you have to take another leap of faith, and it works. You say, "Wow, that worked!" And you take another one. "Wow, that worked too!" And pretty soon you cannot deny that it's working. Pretty soon, experiencing God working your life, faith comes. And as faith develops, it's no longer a state of mind, it is something that you use in every day. Language of the Heart meeting, one time we had several ministers there, and they used to drag each other into our AA meetings to find out what we were doing that was working, and they couldn't. And we got into this discussion. How do you compare faith with trust? We say we have faith in God, we say we trust God. What is the difference? And the consensus seemed to be that faith is a belief system, but the trust is putting that belief to work. That is, trust is the action of faith. The faith without works is dead, which means that unless we trust God in our actions, we're going to lose our faith. It will die. It's kind of interesting stuff, you know, and I suppose it gets a little bit esoteric, maybe even metaphysical, but nevertheless, it's a learning process, and we get to try to make some sense out of all this, at least a little bit of sense. So, I had a wonderful meeting in the Keys about 2 weeks ago, sitting outside because they had forgotten to bring the key. Nobody showed up. And we sat around outside, 6 of us. Nobody was local. We all came from somewhere else. And the subject that we discussed was, what is your conception of God? It was a fascinating meeting. Everybody in that meeting got to express themselves and what is to their particular conception of God. And it was a beautiful meeting.
It's thought-provoking, sure.
Oh, yeah.
Very thought-provoking.
All right, guys, if there's nothing else, let's close the meeting. I want to thank you so much for being here. This has been a lot of fun. Good meeting.
We could have that same discussion here sometime, too, about what is everybody's concept of God.
Yeah, I'd like to do that. Okay, let's let this circle represent the unity of our fellowship. Let's have a moment of silence for those who are still suffering. And we'll say the Lord's Prayer together. And in our group, we don't say anything after we say Amen. Thank you. Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Thank you all so much for being here, Brian. We want to stick around and help Marilyn. See that she gets home safely.
Thanks, buddy.
Sure glad you're here.
Yeah, man.
You gonna come back?
Yeah.
Okay.